you.
So just to give you an idea about my journey to this, I have been teaching genocide studies since 2016, so it's been about 9 years. I had the honor and privilege to be a education project fellow last year, in which I traveled to Armenia, as you can see right here, overlooking a beautiful valley. I think I stood here for a good 5 or 10 minutes, just kind of looking there. I have been to the Belfair Conference in Washington, D.C. I've traveled to Israel, and I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation. So, one of the biggest things about genocide studies is that it's something that is growing, yet I don't think it's growing quite enough, especially given the times that we live in. If you can see this side by side, there is legislation for Holocaust education in these several states. Okay, there's been mandates passed. It's been included in the curriculum, and here are some of the states where it isn't mandated, but it's permissible. So, like, we encourage you to have it in your classroom. Well, I think the Genocide Education Project, myself, my teaching partner, we believe that it should be in every school and not just a unit, but a course. Okay, so this is something you can just put in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and talk about your particular state. Does your state mandate or promote genocide education? Do you know of any legislation that is going towards genocide education, or is there a lack of standards? If you wanted to put that in the chat, please feel free to do so. And I know that our
Please put
our
it in the Q&A, not in the chat.
the Q&A, sorry, my bad. That Seta will put it up for you. And that can just be as we go on to the next slide. So this is myself. I am right there. And there's Justin Bilton. He is also a Genocide Education Project Fellow. He went in 2022. And the uniqueness of our class, we believe, comes from the fact that we've taken social studies and English, and we've created a humanities-based course using the best of both worlds. We were in the Atlantic at the start of the pandemic. It just happened to coincide. We had our interview, I believe, in May or April, and they published it in September. Um, I can remember sitting down. It was Zoom. We didn't know what was happening with everything going on. We didn't know what was going on with school. But this reporter who came from the Hechinger report, who also wrote for the Atlantic, wanted to do a piece on it because the fact that we were creating a high level of rigor in an academic class in a vocational school was something that people had questions about. I don't necessarily know why, but so be it. So I always say that we're going to shout to the rooftops anyone who wants to hear about our course and start one at their own uh, place. Now, one of the things that we have to really make sure that we talk about when we're talking about either teaching the Armenian genocide or the Holocaust is that there's a lot of ethics involved in teaching this content. There's a lot of questions about, what students can go and do with this. I mean, this isn't like a physics class, right? This is something that's really sensitive uh, emotionally. You talk about a lot of things that can trigger kids. So what we've decided is we want really the students to be the center of the learning and drive the learning. We want to make sure that we take human rights and history together. A lot of this comes from the USHMM guidelines for teaching the Holocaust. They are very good guidelines, so we've kind of stretched it and we apply it to our course. Some of the most important parts of this course is the sensitivity to both our students and to the victims. I know they're not in the classroom with us physically, but they are in the classroom with us as the way we teach. We really try to delve into narrative as one of our teaching tools. And in that way, the students kind of build relationships, not with the particular genocide, but with the people, the victims, the perpetrators, the witnesses, everything. And as always, with any course, you have to make sure that you pick your sources very carefully. Now, this diagram is not something that we necessarily refer to all the time, but this is kind of how this is our thought process. We'll say that that's a little easier. So obviously we take English and history, okay? And we take the best of both worlds. Um, we have this idea that we can take kind of the best parts of teaching history, international law, historical context. We can use the standards from that, but we can also teach it as an English class and have narratives and have kids do writings to teach the course and for them to demonstrate their learning. So we have multiple perspectives. We make sure that we have um, every set of eyes covered: witnesses, perpetrators, descendants. That's another thing I'm going to kind of talk about towards the end. We want to make sure that we do literary analysis. I mean, that's something that, of course, if you're going, our kids, 60% of them have to go on to a 4-year school. So we make sure that we have literary analysis and they can demonstrate their learning that way. We do comparative analysis, which is something that um, is not new, but people are starting to make sure that it's not just the Holocaust, right? We're not just teaching a Holocaust course, because while the Holocaust can be seen as kind of a model for learning about genocide, there's so many other human rights issues and genocides that I think it's a dereliction of our educational duty to avoid shining the same light upon all those other genocides. And of course, one of the things we always come back to, especially with more modern genocides, is international justice. From this, we have two goals really. We want to develop empathy. Um, I just read an article, I'm forgetting where it was from, about the apathy of students right now and whether or not that's based on kind of the political climate of America, whether that's still a thing coming out of the pandemic. But we want to make sure our kids have empathy, and that ties into social emotional learning. We also want to foster kids to feel comfortable in civic engagement. We're not sitting there saying, you have to go to the protest in downtown Boston, Saturday, it's your civic duty. We encourage them to explore and make sure that they feel that they can be comfortable in those places and in those spaces. And the last thing I want to do before I open it up to any questions, if anyone has any questions, these are our kind of 3 tiers and our 3 goals for our students. This is ongoing throughout the course. We want to make sure that students develop and use analytical skills. I mean, obviously, critical thinking is something we're always teaching our students, especially when they're looking at sources. Are these sources accurate? Are they verifiable? Are they reliable? We definitely want to have empathy and compassion. I think that if you're teaching genocide studies, the human impact is kind of the nexus of it. You have to really go to that human experience. I always say it's not about 6 million Jews. It's about one Jew. It's not about 2 million Armenians. It's about that one Armenian. And also global citizenship. Obviously, we're in a time where the world is connected more than it has ever been. And these kids are going to have those connections and touch all parts of the globe, whether it be electronically or boots on the ground if they decide to go somewhere else. So before I go to this, is there anything in the Q&A, Seta, that I can't see it, but is there
Yeah.
anything in the Q&A? Go right
Um,
ahead.
so they answered your earlier question about
Let's
states.
talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so Minnesota required no resources provided or recommended yet. Washington State only suggests we teach it. However, I've convinced my district to allow me to teach a semester elective of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Oregon, new standards are legislated. And then North Carolina, we have the Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act signed into law in 2021.
Great, great. And I mean, those are all great steps. I wish every state was moving towards that. We do have some that there's legislation pending. Um, Massachusetts, the law was passed, I want to say right before COVID. I remember Justin and I went to the State House and testified, and then we testified on Zoom a little later, about 6 or 7 months later, to a different subcommittee. But that's great. I'm glad that your states are moving towards that. And that person who said, I've convinced my district to allow me to teach a semester elective, that's important. When Justin and I pitched this course in a faculty meeting, we actually heard an administrator in the back say, "Why would anyone want to take that? It's so depressing." Uh, Obviously, I would have a few choice words that were passing through my head, but it actually makes sense. That is, of course, the reason why we need to teach that is responses like that, right? It's the human question, right? Humans, by definition, are not a species that should be killing each other and destroying each other, right? Humans are a social creature. And genocide goes against all that biological programming, right? The competition for resources, colonialism, nationalism. That's great. If there are no more
Nope.
questions in the Q&A, okay.
There's a
Um,
few more. New York has mandated New Jersey. Says New Jersey, yes, mandated New Jersey Holocaust Commission. Uh, Lynn, I don't know where you're from, but it says no mandate. Rumors it's coming, but unknown. Then I have two questions. So,
Go ahead.
um, okay, Lynn says Ohio. Um, Dina, hi Jason. I wanted to ask about the comparative aspect. Which 10 genocides do you cover and why? Indianization is really important at my school, and one of the things I've recognized about my relatively liberal education in Swampscott was that I learned more about genocide as something that happens, quote unquote, over there and quote unquote in the past, but we have
Mm.
examples much closer to home. Do you cover the genocide of indigenous people in what is now the Americas, and what parallels do you make to the Holocaust there?
Did they say Swampscott? That's where I
Yep,
grew up.
Swampscott. Yep,
Swampscott,
Swampscott.
Massachusetts. Swampscott. Yeah, that's where I grew up. So hope. What was that teacher's name?
Dina.
Dina. Oh, okay, great.
Dinah. I
Um,
don't know, but Dina. Okay.
so yeah, so our course, because of the way vocational school works, is half the time. So we only have 90 days. Actually, with seniors, it's more like 81 or 82. We For the most part, other than Indigenous America, we focus mostly on the 20th century. So this year we've covered Indigenous America, basically the colonization of the Western Hemisphere. So everything from, Spanish exploration, French fur traders, all the way up kind of through the American Revolution. Then we cover kind of chronological order. We go Armenia, we do the Holocaust, we do Cambodia, Rwanda. We do Bosnia. And while all that's happening, every day the Do Now is looking at human rights and genocide issues around the world. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about Gaza and Israel. You know, that's been a very difficult topic to discuss. Um, we talk a lot about Ukraine, especially when it came out. We were literally teaching Armenia when the expulsion of the Armenians from Artsakh happened, which was it was a very interesting day because we basically framed it as you are seeing part of genocide and um, ethnic cleansing happening right now. And we compared it back to obviously what happened during the Armenian genocide. As far as comparative analysis, um, we look at it from two ways. One is the human perspective, like what are the people experiencing? So we like compare to the narratives. What are some themes, especially around teenagers? We like to use salvage pages, for instance, in the Holocaust, right? Those diary entries, and we also like to look at the socio-political component as far as how do these genocides happen? And when we cover the 20th century, what we see is we see a lot of nationalism. We see a lot of competition for resources. Obviously a lot about land and living space, Lebensraum in the Holocaust, but Pan-Turkism is a direct kind of matchup for Lebensraum. So that's kind of how we go about the comparative analysis piece. A lot of it is about comparing people's stories, though. Again, we want to the number 6 million or 2 million or you know 200,000, they're not comprehensible for kids, right? What have you ever seen a million of anything? Is a question that we talk about. So it's about that one person's story and this person's story. I tell the kids a story when I went to the Holocaust Museum, and as a third generation Holocaust survivor, obviously an emotional place. Walking over the room where they have the shoes, I tell the kids, I say, look, there's a pile of hundreds of shoes right there. But what we're going to teach you is not about necessarily just the hundreds of shoes. It's about the two shoes right there that a 10-year-old girl walked to the gas chamber in. And what was her story? Where was she from? What did she experience? Um, so that's how we do that. And is there any other questions or comments?
No, I think Carrie managed the rest of them.
Great. Okay, great. Obviously, if you've taught genocide or human rights, you're probably familiar with the 10 stages of genocide. I don't really need to re-go over them or reiterate them for anyone, but these are a nonlinear approach from Human Rights Watch to how genocides begin, what happens during them, and the aftermath. So, as far as how that goes, we generally try to do some comparative analysis, not directly at the same time, but as we go through the course, we keep referring back to the 10 stages. So we use that as an anchor point. So we go through Armenia, you know, classification, us versus them. Like we go right through and say, okay, what's the us versus them in the Armenian genocide? Catholics, Islam, Armenians, and Turks, right? Especially how policies are created at the government level, right? If you talk about the Holocaust, the Nuremberg laws, and how that affected the relationship between Jews and non-Jews in Germany. And of course, I just started today. We started Rwanda and talking about Hutus, Tutsis, and Twa, and how the colonial powers divided them. Organization, how are these genocides carried out? You know, sometimes we talk about there's more intimate forms of genocide, and intimate, I mean close up. The Hutus using machetes and things like that, and the killing is very close. Whereas, you know, towards the end of the Holocaust, no one was even looking at the victims. They were in gas chambers, and the Nazis didn't even police that. It was either the Einsatzgruppen, it was um, Lithuanian alternative police, it was the Sonderkommandos, right? So like getting further and further away and how that changes the ability of people to carry out genocide. And obviously, you know, polarization is really important too, especially when we start trying to tie things to what's going on in the world today and how, unfortunately, like America, all over Europe, there's this left and right polarization where people are going at each other. So it's really important to get that comparative analysis, not just between the genocides, but to what we're seeing today in the world. You know, we find commonalities between the genocides. We look at news stories and we look for verifiable news. We try to look at the differences in the genocides. We try to find commonalities, and that link to, I mean, I mean, look at this. This is Gaza. It might as well be Dresden. It could be, you know, villages that were raised in Armenia outside of Yerevan. It's the same, you know, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That's kind of one of the, you know, we use a lot of euphemisms and things like that. Um, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a continuation of all these events. And, you know, if we're really talking about kind of this philosophical approach to it, we're really looking at how do we break the cycle? How do we break the cycle of polarization that leads to, you know, the classification of people? What does us versus them look like back then? What does it look like today? And how can we try to stop that cycle of violence? This is where I'd like to also um, bring in a little uh, questions from people, and not really so much questions, but with people's experiences. Where do you see challenges and opportunity in bringing current events to studying past genocides? I kind of gave you my approach to it. One of the things that we have paid particular attention to is inherent biases and false narratives, especially in current events. So uh, I don't want to necessarily pause. Um, I usually like to have conversations during this point, but please put things in the Q&A. And I know that Seta will hold up the stop sign for me when she has some good stuff in there, Carrie too. So I'm just gonna do a couple more before we get to that point where I'll read or answer some of the questions. Now, this took us kind of a lot of time to develop this idea to try to break kids thinking about who participates in these genocides, right? So when you look at a genocide, the classic the classic idea is the victims and the perpetrators, right? Bystanders would be in there too. But as we break up these subgroups in victims, right? Direct victims, indirect victims, we also consider bystanders victims, especially people who have choiceless choices, right? Did you know, we know that the Lithuanian Police Battalion 101 had choice. They could choose to be part of the shooting squads in Eastern Europe, or they could choose not to be. They had that agency. However, in Cambodia, right, the Khmer Rouge did not have that agency. If you did not participate in Ankar, you were seen as the enemy, right? And on the perpetrator side, we go to that too. These perpetrators, were they willing? Were they conversed? That doesn't change the way we look at the victims of the genocide, but it does change how we think about what drives people to do these things. When your family is being threatened, right? I mean, we see this a human rights issue in Central America, like these drug cartels, right? Take this, take these drugs across the border, or we're going to kill your whole family. That's a choiceless choice, right? Those people are coerced. Now, as far as bystanders, this is something really important that when you're creating a course, you want to make sure that when you're picking your literature about what you're going to share with the kids as far as narratives go, you want to make sure that you kind of include all these things, right? So, what makes a bystander, right? A bystander can be a victim. A bystander can also be a perpetrator, right? A bystander who doesn't do anything, um, if they have agency to do so, could be considered a participant, right? Victims go into many different categories. I mean, obviously, there's the direct victims, people that were killed or injured, but there's also the indirect victims. Um, we think about the uh, descendants of people who affected genocide or were affected by genocide. We think about family members across the globe, right? Like during the Holocaust, some people escaped and some people didn't, right? They're victims as well, because they lost their people. Is it the targeted group? Is it a coerced killer? Um, when you're picking your narratives, make sure you cast a wide net. That's one of the biggest things that we learned over the 9 years of teaching the course, is that we have to really look at our sources and make sure that we have a lot of different perspectives to look at. And it might seem like you can overwhelm the kids with this, but you don't necessarily have to read entire books. We try to find passages that mirror each other from different perspectives, and we try to teach analysis that way. Okay. So again, this is kind of just a little bit of and I'm going to stop for questions in a second. Um, Choosing text for any of this is very difficult. Um, of course, everything's graphic. We have kids that can be triggered very easily, especially when it comes to physical or sexual violence. Um, the social emotional learning piece, right? This might be something you can talk about with your guidance counselors or adjustment counselors, especially if you have any notes in your roster about kids with pre-existing things, as far as trauma. I mean, usually they're not too specific. We do, as a disclaimer, at the beginning of the course, we obviously warn these kids, and whenever we read something that has violence, we kind of warn the kids and we say, look, if you're reading this and you're uncomfortable, put it down, walk away, email us, tell us. There's always something we can do. Um, Reading full books or selections of several texts can either omit other perspectives or lack context. You have to make sure that if you're taking from multiple sources, you give the kids kind of an overview. And one of the things that we really try to push on people is making sure you incorporate that perpetrator perspective, not to, obviously not to glorify or put or shine a light on the perpetrators. It's a little hard sometimes. There can be some discomfort, but seeing what drives these people to commit genocide is another clue on how genocide can be prevented. That's something we really try to stress. Um, I'm going to stop there if there's any questions about choosing sources or teaching methods.
So Amanda says, I work in
Mhm.
a very red area, so I walk a
Mhm.
fine line with current events.
Yeah.
Eric says, for trauma, I have now been told I cannot use PBS NewsHour clips for eighth grade because the segment on Darfur traumatized a student and their parent badly.
Okay. And so I heard very red area. Obviously, teaching in Massachusetts has its benefits, right? Massachusetts is a fairly liberal state. However, one thing that we have come up against is that we do teach at a vocational school and we have a lot of agriculture programs. So we have a lot of kind of that farmer kind of classic conservative cohort too. One thing about that I can maybe give you some advice if you're living in a red area. And I talking about politics can be really difficult, especially in the context of education right now. I would say that prefacing everything where it's not about conservative values or liberal values, it's about human values, right? And Justin and I always preface everything. We're like, we're not giving you any opinions. Like we're showing you what has happened. And the only real opinion is that, one, international law should apply to everything, right? Ben Ferenz, the prosecutor at Nuremberg, Israel, America, China, North Korea, you know, uh, anywhere. If there's international law, everyone should appeal apply that to how they run their government. Now, obviously, people have different opinions about that, but when you make it a human issue about a person's right to live, I think that can really put out that fire of that political swing, that idea about, you know, um, America first, that kind of thing. It's about human beings. And even if, America's pulling back from USAID, or if they're doing anything like that, it doesn't mean that these issues aren't happening, and they're important to talk about. Um, the second part, what was the second part, Seta?
The person that they showed something from PBS NewsHour
Okay.
about Darfur and got triggered.
Um, so obviously something you previewed, obviously something that you knew. And I think those surprises can be very difficult. And we've come up to some of those surprises before. Um, you know, I'm of I'm of Jewish descent. We have Palestinian students. In fact, this particular student is the sister of a friend of my daughter from her school. And in class one day, someone was asking me towards like the beginning of the war when October 7th happened about kind of like just the general history of it, and we hadn't really started covering it yet. And she only heard about half the conversation, and she was upset. And obviously, I had to diffuse that, and I did so by saying, look, my job in here is not to be, an advocate for Israel or an advocate for Gaza. My job here is to be an advocate for human rights. And if we see human rights being violated anywhere, that's an issue. As far as the sources go, it's real. I mean, you're always going to be surprised. I'm I don't know where this particular teacher is, but I don't want to make an assumption that they're in an area where PBS is seen as a kind of liberal boogeyman, that kind of thinking. Obviously, if you're talking about Darfur, I mean, you're talking about famine, you're talking about starvation. So it is going to be a graphic conversation. So maybe if it was the visual of it, um, you have to find ways around it. One of the ways we do that is by using podcasts. We find news podcasts that, I mean, it's all audio, so that you're not showing any graphic pictures. And that's also something I want to talk about a little bit here, is that we rarely show any graphic content in our class, like death, people being murdered, that stuff. We don't need to, right? The narratives are good enough. There's only, I think, about three or four times I can count on one hand where we have anything graphic being shown, and it all has to do with evidence used in the pursuit of justice. Because we feel that if you know we're going to we're going to die on the hill where international justice is kind of the last bastion where genocides are going to stop, right? There has to be some place where people can take uh their cases and where they can seek justice. And the evidence used in those cases we feel is really important. So we use some of the films that were created in the concentration camps by the US government. We use a part of a documentary called for Srebrenica, um, that has a home movie of people being shot, and it's not from like really close up. Um, and a lot of kids, they watch it and they're surprised. They think it was going to be more dramatic. We've had kids say, it just happens, like it just happens, and Justin and I are like, that's the point. Like, it's hard to rationalize how easy it is for some of these people to perpetrate these atrocities. But yeah, I wish I could help you. I don't know where in the country you are, but I would say that using using podcasts or using audio or using text as sources is probably the way to go if something's going to be really graphic. Um,
So
and this
Eric,
really tie. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead, Seta. Sorry.
Eric said he teaches all spectrums politically in his district, entire state of Minnesota. And the issue was a man describing through a translator being forced to commit familial cannibalism, no graphic images.
Interesting. Um, what what genocide or human rights issue, if they can put that in the chat? Um, and did
That
that
was
pose a?
Darfur. Darfur.
Oh, that was the Darfur. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, wow, that really was a curveball to me. I guess. I mean, I believe you said middle school, right? Um,
No, that was the other person was
oh, that
eighth.
was the other
Oh no,
person.
no, yeah, no, you're right. Eighth grade.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Um, see, we teach seniors, so that's generally not an issue if we kind of set them up to know that that's what's coming. Um, I hate to be the person that says I wish I had an answer, but um, that might just be an age thing. Did you say the parent was traumatized too?
Yes.
That's
He said, and he also said it's weird because 50% said they were okay, 50% said they were not okay.
wow. That's that is that is a sticky widget. I I almost want to say I wish I've had that struggle here because I could give you some more advice on that in your course. Um, I guess it's just being more, I don't want to say cognizant, the right word. You know, maybe start with a little less um, graphic depiction, not depictions, excuse me, descriptions, and like moving up from there. Um, if you have a parent night at the beginning of the year, that might be a good time to preview some of this stuff with your parents. I know we only get about 10 minutes when they're running through their kid's schedule, but um, Justin and I always believe in front loading as much information as we can to make sure that the kids know what's coming. Um, uh, definitely wasn't. I mean, if there was no graphic imagery, like you couldn't have foreseen that happening. But I guess that's one of those kind of live and learn things, which we've had too. You know, we read a couple of texts from the Rwandan genocide, and we thought they were fine. They were a little intense for some of our kids. So we've taken different parts of that. Seta, is that it?
Just Amanda says she spends a lot of time trying to outfox Fox News.
Yeah. I mean, is that's one of the walls that we pardon the pun, that's one of the walls we're up against, right? As far as, when kids come into our classrooms, they're coming in with a preconceived set of value, their values are already there, especially when they're seniors. We've had kids that have said some things that I would bet, my kid's lunch money came from Fox News. And the way we've diffused that is basically by saying, and you're right, Fox News, be like, well, that's definitely one perspective, right? So you don't want to like put validity on what the kids say if it's something that obviously as an educated person who's teaching this material, you're not going to validate, but you could say, look, opinions are like, armpits. Everyone has them and they all kind of smell. But here's the thing. People can have those opinions, but when it comes to some of those issues of right and wrong, as far as international law and as far as like human rights and empathy, whether or not Fox News says it or whether or not, MSNBC says it, if it's ethically right, it's ethically right. And I think that's one of the things that we always have to be on our toes about. Um, and that's a tie into this, right? We don't study genocide just because people died. We study genocide because of everything leading to it. And that's one of those things about like Fox News or kids coming in watching Fox News or not having the context to understand what they're watching, right? That's why a big part of the course is that empathy piece, right? Using language that helps develop empathy, right? These are people's stories. This isn't just content, right? We're not doing, physics and chemistry problems. No offense to physics and chemistry teachers, but we're talking about stuff that relates to the human experience. I mean, that's what drove me to want to teach in the humanities. Um, Losses of property, independence, civil freedoms. Oh, uh, I apologize. It's bedtime, and my daughter wants to give me a hug. Night. I love you too. Yep, love you. Go 7. Okay, I'll come. Mwah. Thank you. Bedtime trumps all, everyone. The idea of losses of property, independence, and civil freedoms are that's a legal issue. And if it's a legal issue, there is a right and wrong, right? The idea of dehumanization, how do we have people drive themselves to this, where they can dehumanize a person, where they can treat a person um, like an animal or a piece of property. This violence piece, that's, I mean, that's huge. Like, genocide is not just about death, it's about the taking of human agency away from people through different forms of violence. And of course, eliminating cultures and faiths. I mean, that's at the base of many of the genocides we study. Um, I've just put, looking at the time, I want to leave time for more general questions and discussions. But I've put a couple examples of different things that we do in class to give you an idea of how like we use that combination of social studies and English language arts. So um, when Justin went to Armenia with the Genocide Education Project, he felt his work wasn't done, so he actually went back the next year. He wasn't married at the time, so he had a lot more freedom than I do. I kind of, I have to stay local around Massachusetts for the most part. But he interviewed people that were exiles from Artsakh, and he took those interviews, he had them subtitled, and we use those as we study the Armenian genocide to provide a little bit more context for a descendant experience and for people that are experiencing human rights violations today. I created a lesson about the Holocaust and genocide in media to try to break that cycle of that idea that, while our kids are having a whole genocide education course where we're comparing genocides, where we're doing all this work, there are some places in the country where someone's only education about the Holocaust is watching a clip from Schindler's List. And that's not hyperbole. Like those are stories that I've heard, is that when they were in school, these adults who are learning things, they only had passing knowledge of the Holocaust, or only they had, a lot of people haven't even heard of the Armenian genocide. Um, that's American history too. Like I never learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre when I was in school. Now I teach 3As on it because I feel it's that important. Um, so those are more like that goes from like the linguistic learning styles. This is a more audiovisual one, and then we have some photo analysis. Of course, photo analysis is really important. And everything, though, is generally a written response. There's some sort and form of written response so that we can evaluate if the kids are analyzing what we want them to be doing. Right. So this is just, a slide from our notes, right? With kind of a question to lead discussion. All right. This is about who knew what when during the Cambodian genocide. And, we have a piece of text for the kids. We kind of do these notes just as a slide. We give the kids a 5-minute break to read some of the text, and we come back and like, okay, what did people know? And that leads to that's if you go Socratic with it, that leads to, okay, if people knew this, why wasn't anything done? And if something wasn't done, like, did people try to get something done? And I don't want to say go down the rabbit hole. That's a cliche that doesn't really apply here. But you can create a discussion that goes from 5 minutes to 15 minutes about, what's the role of the um, faraway observer, right? This is my favorite part of this course. Okay. And this is something that you might not do in the first year, but this is something that everything we do in the course leads up to. It's our capstone exhibition. Okay, so we, the first day of class, assign an exhibition to the kids, and we explain what an exhibition is, and we tell them you can choose any human rights issue, genocide issue, past, present, something that could be in the future, and your job is to research it with a specific niche, a specific question, and you're going to collect enough research to create a presentation at the end of the year that we open to the public. So, standing here is Dr. Chris Moriello, who's the director of our Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Salem State University. Both my teaching partner and I have taken classes with him. We bring him in to talk to the kids about new scholarship in the Holocaust. That's another thing too. You can bring in speakers. I know sometimes that's tough as far as money and resources, but we try to bring in speakers to our class. This is our process with it. Again, depending on like if you have the kids for a semester, if you have the kids for a whole year, we go by quarters, right? The first quarter, we have days set aside to talk about topics. And as the kids are learning about the foundations of how they're going to learn about genocide, they can then go and they can say, okay, well, my family is of Armenian descent, or my family escaped Cambodia in 1978, right? They ran away from the Khmer Rouge, right? As they start looking at things from that perspective, from an academic perspective, it then leads them to like, what is their specific question? Once they get their specific question, we do a lesson on academic research and making sure that they're verifiable and reliable sources. This is where we start writing annotated bibliographies with them. We facilitate and guide them during this. And then finally, quarter three, right? The last phase of the preparation is the product design. The students have to create some sort of project and product. Some people, some kids, um, kind of the length of their ability is a visual display. And that's okay as long as their visual display conveys what their question was and what their research found. We also try to prepare them for speaking to the public. It's a little harder to do, as we know that some high school kids and even middle school kids too don't they're not necessarily people that shout from the rooftops like teachers do, but it does give them a little bit of something that they have to prepare for as far as being there and being in the moment. It also helps that as a vocational school, our kids are out in the workforce, so they're used to interacting with people. At a traditional high school, that might not be the same. And then finally, quarter four is when we have the actual exhibition. We finalize the project and we frame it as like, look, this is your final exam. Like, we are going to be walking around, we're going to be listening to you talk to people, and it's not so much we're going to, assign an arbitrary number to your grade. We want something, we want the participants to come in and walk away with some more knowledge and some more context about what we do here for the class. And we've done it for several years. It's been very, very successful. The exhibition this year is on May 2nd. If any teacher is local to Essex Tech and Danvers and wants to come on in, it's in the alumni gym May 2nd from 10 to 1. Feel free. This is just some images of kids, and I can tell you about their projects. This display, actually, this was donated to St. Stephen, the Armenian school in Watertown. The kids created what they felt was a typical room in Armenia before the genocide, and each one of these little icons had lights. And when they pushed on the light, a light would also come on a board that had information about life during the Armenian Genocide. This one down here in the center, this was about Cambodian rock music. Now, that's not about a genocide, it's about culture. And this girl right here, she is second generation survivor of the Cambodian genocide, and she wanted to examine some of the culture that was lost during the genocide. Um, this project to the lower right, the Armenian Genocide, the lead singer of the band System of a Down, which is this heavy metal band, which Rohan here is a big fan of. He wanted to profile how Serge Tarkanian uses his experience as an Armenian genocide descendant in his art. And then, speaking of art, we had an entire project on resistance to genocide as told through art. One of these kids, I believe, got into Brown and goes to Brown. And we're really proud, really proud. The district attorney of our county is a friend of mine, and he comes every year, and he always kind of, pumps my tires and says, I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing. Not to pat my own back, but getting that feedback from the public and not just the school is really important, and that helps keep our course going. We have 200 kids that we teach every year. One of the kids who is in design and graphics created this poster. This is one of the best posters that we used to advertise. Last year, we even had a night session. This year, unfortunately, we're not able to. This is me with a little bit more hair that's a little less gray and a larger beard, testifying in front of the Massachusetts legislature about the need for genocide education. We even had a former student who went from equine science at UMass to switched into international law and human rights because of our course. She was inspired, which is great. Um, she came and talked about her experience and why courses like that are really important. We see Ukrainian flag here as well. And this is with it being 8 minutes till, I just wanted to share this rail pass is a woman named Margaret Ellsberg. I mean, obviously, you can read kind of art by studying genocide here, but Margaret Ellsberg lived in Essen, Germany, and her parents and brother were murdered in Sobibor. She was able to escape to New York, where she met her husband. They eventually moved to the North Shore, of Massachusetts, and one of their children was my mother, or is my mother. My grandmother, who passed away in 2008, came to this country um, with $5, and she lived with her aunt. She barely had a formal education because Hitler took that away, and she dedicated the rest of her life to giving back to America. And she did it through volunteering for the town, Marblehead Swampscott. She was on the PTO. She worked for Hadassah Charities. She ran the thrift store for Hadassah in Lynn, Massachusetts for 30 years. Um, she's really one of the inspirations as to why I teach this course and the idea of giving back. So hopefully today, I hope that I gave a little bit back and that you all have something that you can take away and some ideas maybe for your own course or for starting a course. Oh, and another thing too, if you need professional development specifically about creating a course like this, we can talk about that too. We've hosted professional developments with the help of Gen Ed at our school. And depending on where you are, in the country, if we can get to you, we'd love to help.